aware, this session is being recorded. This is the building official breakout for March 2024 Virtual Code Academy. We have with us today our presenter, Jay Richards, who is the Assistant Construction Codes Administrator for the Board of Building Standards. He is an architect and is instrumental in code development here at the board. And he will be talking about the role of the building official this afternoon. And Bruce Culver is here with me, Meg Foley, to help answer questions in the chat and bring things forward if they need to be addressed verbally. And so I'm going to pass along to Jay.
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate the introduction. I don't think I really need to add anything more other than in addition to code development, I also am the board's designee heading up the industrialized unit program here. So if you have questions about that, and as well as any other questions about building codes and building administration. The first thing, and oh, by the way, yes, welcome to the very last session of Code Academy, and thank you for hanging out with me on Friday afternoon to do building officials and talk to you about responsibilities that building officials have. Obviously, as I've always said, building officials, you're the leaders, you're the AHJ, you're the authority having jurisdiction. You set the tone, you set the tenor. How is your building department going to conduct themselves? How are they going to act? How are they going to interact with the public, with each other, with the potential to have contracts with other certified personnel to perform duties on an as needed basis. There's a lot of things that come into play here. And you as the building official have that role of being the leader, setting the tone. And my experience, I came from the private sector. I was an registered architect, still am. Worked for a firm for several years, got into the ownership of it, and at times that was my role as leader of that organization, setting the tone. So I know a little bit about what you have to go through. Building departments, we talk a lot about building codes. We talk a lot about the technical aspects of that. Through Code Academy, we do a lot of focus on the process. We talk about Chapter 1. We talk about all the stuff that happens in Chapter 1. We talk about certification rules, the stuff that happens there. And so you find out more about the process. But the one thing for building officials is there's a lot of responsibilities that you have in terms of running a department that fall sort of outside those technical aspects or outside that process aspect. And we're going to touch on some of those things today. We're going to at least make you aware that as a building official, you're going to be faced with some other challenges besides just those typical things you think of when you're thinking about administering the building code, beyond interpretations of building code sections, beyond setting up the process to go through a plan approval and working on those things. So with all that being said, one of the first things I'd like to do is I'd like to go back to a slide that we had at the beginning of Chapter 1, and it's that interactive process slide. And I'm going to share it here on my screen, and we'll kind of take the opportunity to walk through it with you. So everybody should see a slide on their screens now that says interlinked processes across the top. And it's kind of blank, has sort of a Ohio flag superimposed over the state of Ohio. And we'll just work on building this slide as I talked about at the beginning of Chapter 1. So the first thing we have in all this is That purple line represents the timeline of a building, the lifetime of a building, if you will. And it starts at one end with the owner's idea. They want to build a building and they have some designs in mind. But what those designs have to reflect are the requirements that are shown in the building code, the requirements that may exist in the fire code, any kind of local ordinances that may exist, like from a zoning department or an engineering department, any kind of licensing requirements that may exist from another agency, uh, like Job and Family Services for childcare, or the Department of Health for a public swimming pool, or Department of Developmental Disabilities for housing of disabled folks. Just things like that. So the owner needs to be aware of all these things that might impact the building, but not all of them are going to be under your authority or will be part of the hat that you wear. Remember, you might wear multiple hats as a building official, but you have to remember where the authority is that you're deriving that power. So the owner prepares their design, they get their designs prepared and then they submit them to the building department. And one of the key things about this whole process is that you have to accept those plans. If the owner comes in with a set of construction documents and they want to make application for plan approval, you have to help them through that process and accept those plans. And from there, remember that starts that 30-day clock and you start your review process. What the owner is interested in is that certificate of, at this point, is that certificate of plan approval. That's their license to build. And it's also a representation that what they've proposed in their construction documents has been determined to be compliant with the building code in force at the time. But with this certificate of plan approval, and it has to happen before any construction starts. Once they have that, that owner is able to start his construction in a lawful manner, um, and uh, um, and obviously hire contractors and get them out there building things. Uh, Now, what I would like to point out is this is on the building code side, down here below the purple line. Above the purple line are those local ordinances and licensing requirements. Now, to make a fine point here, the building code is going to work with approvals. The local ordinance may work with a permitting process. And in that permitting process, you may have multiple approvals that an owner needs to have before they can start construction, actually put a shovel in the ground. What this certificate of plan approval, or CPA, says is what they've proposed to do is compliant with the building code. So they have a license to build that as compliant with the building code. They may not have cleared zoning. They may not have cleared their engineering review or their architectural design review. Um, the owner still needs to work on those things, and some jurisdictions have a permitting process that allows that to happen before they can put that shovel in the ground. But once they do, they, as far as the building code goes, they need at least a certificate of plan approval. In your jurisdiction, they may also need a permit. But once they get there, they're starting to construct. The owner has a responsibility as he proceeds through the construction to contact the building department and say, hey, remember that list of required inspections you sent with my certificate of plan approval? I'm ready for that first required inspection, or we're down the list now, that third required inspection. Lot lines have been looked at and they're there. Foundations have been dug and we've got our foundations poured. We're up to the point where we have rough framing in and we want a rough framing inspection. So owner calls and the building official is responsible to cause that inspection to happen. They may not actually go out there and do it, but they need to cause it to happen. So the building inspector is out there and he's looking, and it's in conformance, so he gives a satisfactory report on his inspection log. And of course, once all those required inspections are done, uh, that log is complete, everything is satisfactory, that gets reported back to the building official, and the building official then is required to issue a certificate of occupancy. Now, what that says and it what it means is that that building is assumed to have complied with the rules of the board in force at the time that it was built. So it is considered code compliant if it has that certificate of occupancy. Now, as far as the building code is concerned, that's the part that allows the owner then to move in and occupy their building. Um, And part of the certificate of occupancy is that the owner is required to maintain his building in accordance with that approval. This is all on the building approval side. So this blue line kind of represents the building code and compliance with the building code, and where the building department is the most active. After the certificate of occupancy is issued and a copy is sent to the fire official for the jurisdiction, that's when the Ohio Fire Code is the most prominent uh, set of rules that is applicable to the occupancy of that building. It is looked at as a fire prevention code. Now, the building department and the building code, we have fire protection. So that's going to be kind of the static stuff, the stuff that goes in. But fire prevention, that's going to be more the operations, maintenance, the ongoing things that happen over time. In some jurisdictions, the fire official may participate in some of this early review and inspection work, but their primary role is down here at this end. Now, back up to the top, the owner may be in need of a license to conduct whatever operations they're doing in the building. So they're going to still be working with a licensing agency up there through this process to make sure that they get their license so that when they do occupy their building, they can actually do what they intended to do in there relative to the business if it required some kind of license. And of course, as we mentioned before, as time goes on, any kind of there's a lot of repairs. There's a lot of opportunity where an owner may want to make an alteration or an addition or something like that. And of course, if you have a lot of non-residential occupancies, will require some type of annual inspection from the fire official. And all of these activities have the potential of requiring the owner to come back to the building department and get an approval for those changes or those modifications, those repairs, alterations to their building. So it could be as simple as a repair. It could be a more complicated, like an alteration or an addition or a change of occupancy. The fire official could write an order saying, "Hey, you need to repair this. This is a bit of a hazard. You seem to be using this building not in accordance with its approval." Because remember, he has a copy of the certificate of occupancy. And all those things may require the owner to come back to the building department to get an approval for those changes that they've made. The building department might come back into play if for some reason the building has sustained sufficient damage or went through enough lack of maintenance that and actually a serious hazard may have developed. And of course, it's the building department, the building officials' responsibility to determine whether that is in fact a serious hazard and then take the appropriate actions relative to that. So that that's one of those responsibilities that you have as a building official. And generally speaking, serious hazards, if the owner is wanting to correct those and clear that order, that work is going to have to come back to the building department for approvals. Kind of corollary to the fire official, that agency that's doing licensing, they may have some annual updates, annual renewals, annual inspections that the owner has to comply with, and they too may require the owner to do something to maintain their license, and that may require the owner to make alterations to their building. So it comes back to the building department again. So really trying to use this as how the building code and the building department is integrated into this whole process. And I think as it kind of helps to build the slide, in my opinion. So that's one of the reasons why I did this. I hope that helps you understand where your role is relative to the building department and how you're heading up the building department, and what kinds of things need to happen. So from there, we want to try and get right into our presentation here. And I have to find the window. I'm sorry. Where did it go? There it is. So we're here to really try and understand building officials' duties relative to operating a building department. And so the first slide is about where would you find the building officials' duties explained, and of course in the previous edition of the Ohio Building Code we would have said 104 is where you would find those building official uh, duties and responsibilities explained. And while it's not located there in the 2024 OBC, the language is still basically the same. It just happens to be over uh, instead of in the 2017 OBC, it's going to be over in the certification rules in 4101:7-3. And it reads something like this: that the building official is responsible for the enforcement of the rules of the board and of chapters 3781 and 3791 now of the revised code. So for those people that aren't aware, the rules of the board are administrative code language, and that is enforceable. And the Board of Building Standards gets the authority to write those rules out of Ohio Revised Code chapters 3781 and 3791, and more specifically 3781.10. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate that. Megan posted where the proposed new rules are. Um, and you can find those obviously on our website. And as we mentioned, they are going through rule development, and we would really appreciate any uh, participation that you want to uh, submit in terms of commenting on the rules and what you see to really make them better or as best as they can be. So we're working on enforcement of the rules of the board. And this is going to relate to the construction, arrangement, the erection of buildings, and the parts thereof. So yeah, this is really focused on the building itself. Um, it's not focused on the land around the building other than immediately around the building for draining of storms. It is not focused on who does the work. It's not focused on who pays for the work. It's really mo most intensely about from the exterior of the building in, and it's about those building systems that are in there, and how are they safe and sanitary? How does the building conserve energy, and how is it accessible where it needs to be accessible? So it goes on to say that the building officials shall conduct themselves in a professional, courteous, impartial, responsive, and cooperative manner. These are the duties that the uh, building official has for himself as well as his department. Uh, the the section goes on to read that the building officials shall render interpretations. And this is where the building official is given the sort of the first crack at interpreting this section or the provision or the requirement. We're not allowed to do that here, even as board staff. You'll see us give an opinion about something. You'll see us uh, uh, give reference to something or point out a sequence of code provisions that are applicable, perhaps, but it is really the building official that has that authority to make interpretations of the code section. Obviously, you are not the last, but you are the first. Uh, and by that, I mean owners have the right to appeal an order. The appeal board is out there. And then, of course, beyond that, they have a right to take it to a court of law. And and then of course, the court of law has its own structure of system. So, but you are the first to sort of work on that interpretation part. Now, you're also responsible to adopt the policies and procedures to uh, clarify the application of the code's provisions. So help educate the community, help educate your staff, help put those things in place to really be responsive to your stakeholders, responsive to your constituents, responsive to the people that are wanting to build buildings in your jurisdiction. So, and then the section goes on to talk about how those interpretations, policies, and procedures are to be in compliance with the intent and purpose of the code. Remember, we talked in chapter 1, and it's under 101.3, where we talked about the intent and the purpose. Has several things going on to be uniform, to be minimum, to be standardizing, and to really help make the building industry predictable, reliable, and the result is a safe and sanitary place for people to gather or conduct business or get care and those kinds of things. Um, and then, of course, one of the in doing that, in making those interpretations, policies, and procedures, we do want you to look at it in a liberal sense, in that if there is a reasonable application of the provisions or the requirements in the code that can justify a safe condition, sort of on par with what the more prescriptive requirements say, then we would consider that as liberally interpreting that provision. So, along with those things relative to the building code itself more directly, the building official is responsible to assure that a system is in place to track and audit those projects. So as projects move through, where are they in the process? Um, is it started? Have they asked for inspections? Is it complete and needs a certificate of occupancy? Um, is while you don't have so much of a responsibility to make sure that it's maintained, uh, if there is a call that comes in that somebody is concerned about the safety of the building, you need to be responsive to that call. Um, and then also, you're not doing this by yourself, so you need to assure that all the building department personnel are performing their duties in accordance with the section, and in this case, it'll be 4101 colon 7-3. And then for all the overall administration of the building department. So there's going to be things that happen outside of it, administration of the building code. There's going to be reporting responsibilities back to the Board of Building Standards. There's going to be all those things involved with the employment of people in your department. So staffing issues, providing resources, watching over what happens. Things are going to happen where your public, your jurisdiction wants to have information about um, when that accident happened. Why did it happen? Was there a problem with the building? Um, how did it happen? What can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? Um, So when we try to summarize this stuff, we kind of look at the building official as having an enforcement role. We're trying to push a little bit that perhaps that's going to be more like an administration role rather than an enforcement role. But at some point, if you have to write an order, that does feel a little bit more like enforcement, and that's part of it. But I think the bigger part of everything you do is really about administering this whole process of uh, building code approvals and inspections and stuff like that to result in a safer place for people to gather in the built environment. You're concerned about the conduct of yourself and your staff. You have a responsibility and authority to render interpretations, to make sure that there's a system in place to track and audit how this process that you're in charge of moves through your department. Assure that the building department personnel perform their responsibilities and that you have sort of overall administration responsibilities. Now, when we start breaking this down, I think we can look at it in four general categories. You have those administrative authority duties, you have personnel management duties, you have fiscal duties, and you have public relation duties. And we're going to kind of run through these each one, and we'll break it down into a little more detail. So, enforcement duties, administration duties. Um, so one of the first things that you're really in charge of overall is you may have been asked by the political subdivision, the leaders in the political subdivision, be that city council or county commissioners or township trustees, depending on the building department that you're heading up, to either obtain a department certification if the jurisdiction doesn't have currently have a certification, um, or to continue to maintain that department certification. So remember that you know you have the department is certified to be able to enforce the building codes within the political subdivision, and then the personnel has certifications to perform certain duties for that department. And so as the building official, you're going to have a responsibility to obtain and or maintain the department's certification. And a lot of that is going to be about making sure that the conduct is good, meets those five criteria, make sure that your reporting is done, make sure that you're performing duties within the department in accordance with the rules of the board. The next thing, sort of in that list, now you have a department, and now the people in your jurisdiction have to come and get a plan approval before they can build their project. And so the first thing that you need to do is, besides have that location, have that process established and be ready and willing to accept building plans for approval. And there's generally three parts to this. One is the application that the owner fills out and gives you that 30,000 foot look at their project, gives some information about how to contact them, where the building is, the kind of building that they're trying to produce or proposing to build, and some other information. Then you have that package of construction documents that explains or describes or demonstrates how what they're proposing to build is compliant with the building codes, the applicable building codes. And then there may or may not be a fee associated with this process at that time. just an FYI, in case you weren't aware, uh, our rules do not talk about fees relative to the building department and their operations and processes. That is something that building departments establish for themselves of what it should be, what it needs to be, what they think is reasonable to conduct the plan approval processes. The next real responsibility you have is, the building official has that responsibility to cause that, once that plan is in, they have that responsibility to cause that plan to be reviewed, looked at for code compliance by the plans examiner. And so while you may not be doing it yourself, you are responsible to make sure it happens, because remember, that clock is ticking. That 30-day clock started when you accepted that application and those construction documents, and you have to get this through plan review process. Uh, More than likely, you have certified personnel on your staff to help you with that, and that plan approval uh, process has to happen. So um, once the and of course, you obviously you have to think about, the smooth run is there was no issues with the plans. There's nothing that's problematic. Everything is compliant. It's clear. It's complete. It's ready to go. You issue that plan approval. You issue that certificate of plan approval with the inspection card with the list of required inspections, and you return what you need to the building owner or their representative, and now the ball's back in their court. uh, but there's also that process where maybe something isn't perfect. Maybe there is issues that need to be addressed. There are issues of non-compliance, and so is the owner going? How you're going to communicate that information back to the owner? One, and is the owner going to revise and resubmit, or is the owner uh, preferring not to do that and requesting an adjudication order, to which is the beginning of the process for them to appeal, and to have that discussion with a third party about uh, whether there needs to be a revision in the interpretation, whether the interpretation is accurate, and before they can move down the road. But at the end of the day, before they can start their construction, they need to get that certificate of plan approval, and you have to have a process in place to make sure that happens, uh, regardless of um, sort of the path they get there, if it's direct or kind of winding through some iterations of revisions and resubmissions. So then the next sort of real responsibility you have is they have that CPA, they've got their permits if they needed permits, they're out there building, they're calling for their inspections, the inspections are done, they're complete, they're satisfactory. You have that responsibility to issue a certificate of occupancy, um, and the owner cannot occupy their building until that certificate of occupancy is issued. The the certificate of occupancy is really about the compliance with the building code. This is that tool that sort of closes that whole process, that approval process. This is important for your tracking and auditing of projects as they move through. This is the part that says, yes, the owner did what they said they would do. They built a code compliant building, and this certificate says that they did. And as far as the building department is concerned, they have the right to occupy that building. There are some cases out there where other agencies within the department, and a lot of times it's when the building official wears multiple hats, that they're asked to use the certificate of occupancy to enforce or hold the owner's feet to the fire on complying with a zoning requirement, or um, some other requirement out there that is outside of our rules, and uh, that is not a permittable permissible use of the certificate of occupancy. The certificate of occupancy is related directly to the building approval process, and it relies solely on compliance with the requirements in the building code. But you have that issue, and of course, when you issue a certificate of occupancy, you then also issue a copy to the fire official for the jurisdiction, so that they are aware that there's this new building and it has this functions going on in it, and it has these fire protection features that they may have a responsibility to look at on an annual basis and make sure that they're maintained. So through this whole process, you as the building official, you are the primary interpreter of the building code. The plans examiner, while he's doing a plans examination, may be looking at it. They need a knowledge of the building code. They need a knowledge about what the requirement is. They need a knowledge of about how you might be inclined to interpret something. So good communication between you and the plans examiner is important. They're going to bring things to your attention through their plan review and the report. Hopefully you have a way that they can flag it and say, hey, you want to pay particular attention to this, or the plans examiner may need some guidance on um, uh, this issue or that issue. And it's going to come down to what your interpretation as the building official is of the particular requirement or the particular provision. Same kind of thing is going to happen with the inspections and the inspector. Remember, the inspector's role, he's or they are really just out there looking to make sure that what is built, what is put in place, is in compliance with the approved construction documents. Now, nobody's perfect, and Debbie talks about it, that there's no such thing as a perfect plan. There might be gaps, there might be holes, there might be something that got missed. And the building inspector is also another set of eyes who needs to be familiar with the building code, who needs to have an understanding of how you look at buildings and have made interpretations in the past. So good communication between you and the building inspector is important. Uh, but if he finds something that he thinks might be an issue, first place is that he checks is what does the approved construction document show? What is in there? What has been approved that the owner has a license to build? And if the owner has a license to build, that's one thing. If it's missed, that's another thing. If there's no information in the construction documents about this, and it may be something that has code requirements attached to it, um, there's a responsibility for the building inspector to report that information back to the building official. Um, Directing work in the field or solving the problem in the field at the direction of the building inspector, it goes outside of the building inspector's authority. Um, Then the other situation that might happen is if something has been constructed in such a way that it may be a serious hazard, or at maybe a little bit less, but definitely a high hazard for the people that are working there, and possibly for the occupants once a certificate of occupancy is issued. That one is those that really needs the building inspector to make contact with the building official and let everybody know as quickly as possible the conditions that are there, to do what they can to help keep people away. But then get with the direction and guidance from the building official, um, address it either as a serious hazard or as if it's something less than a serious hazard, probably something along the lines of a recommended change. But again, you have those different times to interpret the code along the way. The other responsibility that you have that is yours and this is one that you can't, much like interpretations and approvals, this is one that you can't delegate to someone else. Building officials are the authority having jurisdiction, and they are going to issue the adjudication orders. This is probably the part that feels the most like enforcement. However, we look at it as just another tool in the bag that helps the owner get to their desired goal. It is, um, if the owner wants to appeal an issue or get relief from an issue, um, the only way they can do that is to have an adjudication order issued. So all this is a tool that you can use as the building official in the building department to communicate to the owner that you have an issue here that in your interpretation is not compliant with the requirements in the code, and you give them information about which section and what it might take to correct and the time frame to correct. Uh, but what it also offers is the opportunity then for the owner to appeal that. And we've had some really simple examples of where this is, excuse me, beneficial, partly because the code is lags behind just a little bit. Um, and so like we had some instances where um, owners were wanting to use refrigerants that weren't recognized in the building code yet. Um, and so and there weren't any provisions to deal with the combustibility and the flammability of the particular refrigerant, which added requirements. In future editions of the code, it added requirements. So we would talk to the owner. We would say, hey, we'll issue an adjudication order. You need to appeal this. We'll take our discussions up to the appeals board and uh, let them uh, provide you some relief here. And as it turns out, that's just exactly how it went. But it doesn't happen unless that adjudication order is written. So try to think about adjudication order as just another tool in the tool bag to work through the process. Um, and uh, you really need to uh, continue to talk with the owner about making buildings safe and making them sanitary, and sort of why and how that is, rather than well, you just didn't comply with this rule over here, and the rule taken out of context it could be very confusing, could have very little meaning, and maybe putting some context around that might help the owner understand why this is necessary. You also have the responsibility to maintain department records. Now, of course, this one is one that can be delegated, and usually is that there is staff available to help make sure that things are filed so that you can find them, so that things that are time sensitive have a tracker on them, things that uh, uh, you a process happens so that an owner called for an inspection and an inspector didn't show up in 4 days, and he didn't show up in 4 days because the call came in and never got relayed. So sort of how does that happen, and then how do you prove that it happened? Sort of what is that tracking, what is that auditing? um, there's a lot of times when a certificate of occupancy gets issued to the the building. It's issued to the building, and it's often sent to the building owner at the time, um, but it really belongs with the building. However, they can get lost, they can get damaged, they can get destroyed, um, and that copy might have gone away, but the building department needs to keep records of those things. There are certain records that you have to hang on to for the life of the building, and that's one of them. the next owner of the building may not have access to it, and he needs to find out how it was approved. One of the things we're going to tell him is the first thing you need to do is go back to the building department and see if they have a copy of a certificate of occupancy for that building. um, and that is one of the records that you're supposed to keep. So, you have that going, and then of course over time, we have the 1% and 3% collections, and those things are going to come in over time, and you'll have to submit those on a monthly basis, and that it needs to make sure that that happens. Uh, Legal aspects and due process. So yes, you are a an enforcement authority in the administration of the building code. You have need to enter people's properties. People have the right to deny you entrance. Um, so you have to get the right to enter that property. So make sure that, particularly like yourself and your building inspectors, those that are primarily going to be on site entering another's property, that they understand the right of entry and they understand some of the due process things that go on. So, I'm sure Rob talked about it a lot with the building inspectors about what the right of entry is, and sort of what you need to do, how you get there. If you are denied entry, that it's not the building inspector's responsibility to convince the owner that they're wrong and that they need to let them in anyway. The building inspector really needs to uh, turnabout and inform the building official that entry was denied, and the building official has to uh, evaluate that situation, that circumstance, and see what might be an appropriate approach. Does the building official need to contact the owner? Does the building official need to go uh, talk to the law director and possibly seek an administrative search warrant? I think a lot of it's going to depend on who the owner is and what the circumstances are, who and how critical it is that that inspection take place. There are uh, circumstances that require notification on the part of the building official. We talked about one, which is kind of a little aside in terms of the adjudication order. An owner doesn't have a right to appeal unless an adjudication order is issued. That's kind of an illustration of proper notification. There are uh, uh, some other notifications that we would recommend. For example, and in those time frames, applications can become invalid, approvals can become invalid, and they have time frames attached to them. That maybe as the owner has a right to extend the application or extend the approval, but they have to do so with um, more than 10 days before uh, that invalidation or that expiration happens. So there is some timeframes there. So that again is proper notification on the part of the building owner back to the building department to then allow the building department to extend. But we would recommend that the building department might reach out if they think the owner is getting close to this. So through their tracking and auditing, they know the owner might be getting close to one of these expiration dates. They might just send a note out to the owner saying, hey, um, what's happening with this project? Are you moving forward with it? Depending on what where the state of the project is, have you started construction? Are you in a delay on the construction? What's going to be your response relative to our adjudication order? Are you going to revise and resubmit your documentation? All to help sort of keep the records clean, keep things moving along. Don't let it live out in limbo. Then the other thing that you might have to do is you have to you might have to provide testimony. You might have to be deposed. Um, Things happen. People get sued. People think they're wronged. You you might have to explain and be able to justify or clarify what the actions of the building department were, what the actions of the building department personnel were, um, and be able to do that. So yeah, in all of these ways, you want to make sure that you're working closely with your law director, giving you advice about how to lawfully conduct yourself in relation to things that might be outside of the building code requirements. Places where you may not have the right for interpretation or the authority for interpretation, but they are areas of the law that do impact you and you need to be prepared for. You're the leader, you represent that building department. There's also need for some special coordination stuff. Uh, um, so you have responsibilities. You remember these are uh, working with other agencies that are they touch the building. They may impact what's happening with the building to greater and lesser degrees. But if fireworks are involved, you're going to be working with state fire marshal and fire officials, floodplain administrator if the work is happening in a flood hazard area. Um, Property maintenance, if you have a property maintenance code, it's good to work with those folks. Um, Contractor registration, remember what I said earlier is that the building code doesn't really care who does it. So we're not addressing anything related to contractor registration, but your permitting process, if you have one in your jurisdiction, may have requirements that the contractors have to be registered either with you or possibly even carry a license. Um, and that's something that you maintain at the local level. Um, and it doesn't really fit into the uh, approval process, the inspection process, relative to the certification as a building official or as a plans examiner or as a building inspector. But you may have to work with that within your jurisdiction. Uh, Zoning is similar. Health departments may come into play in one of two ways. You know, either your jurisdiction is under a health district that has a plumbing program, and they're doing the approvals and inspections of the plumbing system. And so it's not your department, but it's the health department for the jurisdiction. And or you may be working on a project where the Ohio Department of Health has licensing requirements for the activities that are going on inside the building. So there's some coordination that the owner has to make sure happens. And you might just be aware of those things and could have some helpful tips to the owner that they need to make sure they've contacted their licensing agency. Um, EPA, similar kind of thing. They're, you know, our building code deals with drains. We do not deal with sewers. We will discharge the drain to an approved location. It's oftentimes to a sewer. The sewers are going to be some combination of EPA and Ohio Department of Health. Uh, we talked a little bit about fire departments. Obviously, if you have a fire department that has a desire to review plans, the building official has a responsibility from the building code to reach out to the fire department on an annual basis and get verification that they will or they won't want to participate in the plan approval process. Some fire departments do, other fire departments don't. Some want to participate in some, but not all, and that's just good negotiation between you and the fire official, you meaning building official representing the jurisdiction. State projects, these, you may have land owned by the state within your jurisdiction. Be aware of that and know that, when a building owner comes in with a plan that's on state-owned property, that you're you're not the place to accept those plans. They do have to send them down to the state's building department to get approvals for those. I worked on down here in Central Ohio, Columbus area. Moffrey Stadium sits on the state of Ohio fairgrounds, and while I was working for the owner operator there at Moffrey Stadium, it still had to go to the state of Ohio and not the city of Columbus because it was on state-owned property. Um, so things to know. And of course, we require the ethics, education, and training. So hopefully everybody is getting their ethics for this year. Um, and you, as the leader of your group, your organization, you have that responsibility. Is uh, how are you going to make sure that all your staff meets their continuing education on ethics? How are they actually implementing uh, the things they've learned there, the knowledge they have about ethics? How are they performing their responsibilities and their duties um, within the department, towards coworkers, as well as the public and constituents out of your jurisdiction? Lead by example. So moving on, we have personnel management duties. Um, so these are working into those responsibilities, those duties that you have as a building official that are really outside of the uh, building code and necessarily your sort of as a direct tie to your certification, but because you have overall administration, it is tied to that. And departments need personnel to make sure that they meet all their obligations. And maintaining records and uh, doing things in an efficient way are so that you meet your timelines. It takes some effort. So we'll start with needing to assess personnel requirements. Each jurisdiction is different. Each jurisdiction has a different focus on sort of the development that happens within theirs. Some jurisdictions are very complete. They have stuff from residential housing all the way through to um, heavy industry, hazardous material occupancies, big care facilities, all that kind of stuff. Other jurisdictions, all they are is a nice little bedroom community, and they have mostly residential buildings and maybe a couple of small commercial establishments, but nothing very serious or elaborate or complex as it comes to what some buildings under the Ohio Building Code could be. Um, so, what does your building department need in terms of personnel requirements? Um, and uh, is it a one-man show? Because it's a residential building department and you're the RBO and you have the authority to do um, sort of all the things, building official, plans examiner, building inspector. But then I would say you still need services of the ESI and the plumbing. Plumbing might be done by the health district, so that one's taken care of. You still need that ESI. So you might contract on a basis to deal with the ESI services, but you have most of the rest of it as a one-man show. Or you might be a very large jurisdiction and you have potentially multiple building officials because there's so much work going on. So you have a primary who's responsible. Then you have um, the um, the backups, and that way all those duties and responsibilities are covered. You'll have multiple plans examiners, and you'll have backups, and you'll have multiple building inspectors, and you'll have backups. You need backups anyway, um, but they may be more active in larger jurisdictions on a regular basis. So, assess your personnel requirements. What do you need? Uh, Now you have to fill that need. And of course, that's going to involve a certain amount of staff interviewing and screening. If you're uh, um, if you're filling a position with new, that's one thing. If you're moving into a jurisdiction that's already been established and existing, um, but they may have been having some problems or difficulties. You may need to find out if you have the right personnel and if the personnel is in the right seat on the bus. Um, there's different types of interviews and screenings that you may have to do, but you as the building official um, have a role in that. In a small department, you may be responsible for doing it all. In a larger department, you may have a human resources department that handles a good part of this. Um, and you provide input, um, and you're involved in the process, but you may not be doing it all. So, uh, you know, uh, know what that responsibility is for you as a building official. Know that you might have to do some of this stuff as if you're accepting a job into a smaller department. Uh, work on your interviewing skills and how do you set a priority list relative to who makes a better candidate, one over another, and uh, obviously be objective and be ethical and do all those things that are important to get the best person in the job. In this day and age where staff is at a premium, certified personnel is at a premium, know how you can get the best person to fill that role. You also have, you as well as all your staff, because you're certified persons, have responsibilities for continuing education to maintain your certification. And as the leader of your building department, and knowing that you have uh, staff needs and that there is a premium on staff, it might be really good for you to make sure that your staff keeps up with the changes in the building code, that your staff continues to learn, meets their continuing education requirements. Maybe you're bringing in a new technology into your jurisdiction, going electronic, and building inspectors have tablets, and there's a software application that comes along with it about how you access and how you look at things and how you note things. Um, that may need some additional training. Think about those things as you are thinking about the overall operation of your building department, and make sure that you've at least thought about the needs of the staff regarding education and training. How can you make those opportunities available? I know when I was running the architectural firm, we were always looking for ways to bring in continuing education and kind of keep everybody up at at least a minimum level of exposure to new products, new methods, new software that we found advantageous to what we did. Those programs are out there. See what kind of opportunities that you have to help your staff uh, stay trained, get more training, um, keep up with the continuing education. So that all leads into maintaining your personnel certifications. With and as I've mentioned, and I'm sure most of the building officials that have been uh, uh, in that job or have been working with the manpower that's available out there, finding certified persons to fill roles. I know in our wrap up session, there were some uh, plugs for some jurisdictions that we're looking for people. So I know there's need out there. And it's nothing worse than somebody who had a certification failed to maintain it and they lose their certification. We definitely will work with everybody on helping you maintain your certifications. We provide a lot of opportunities for continuing education credits. Uh, there's still a responsibility on each person person with a certification to um, you know fulfill their duties and responsibilities, and we can't do that for you. Um, but yeah, you as the building official, if you keep your staff together and you help them keep their certifications maintained, uh, I think in the long run, you spend the less time and energy um, trying to either find their replacement or get them caught up uh, uh, through whatever discipline action happens and things like that. So stay out ahead of it. Give those, think about giving those opportunities to the personnel that works for you to keep this up. I know the various OBOA chapters across the state offer training opportunities if your personnel belongs to OBOA. So yeah, there you go. All right, Megan. Megan posted in the chat just what I said, I think. Yes, may help. Um, the other thing that you do with as a building official is, and I touched on this a little bit when I was talking about personnel and training, like you, uh, there are certain resources that people that work for you need. Um, if you are an electronic submission only, the only way they're going to see those plans is if they have the digital equipment to be able to open them up and view them accurately and appropriately. You may have inspectors that have need uh, need of particular tools, um, vehicles, the ability to get to the project sites. Uh, what about um, printers or do you have a need for it? Storage and shelving and all that kind of stuff. So there's endless need for resources. Probably the thing that caps it is the size of your department and how the level of complexity of the projects that come through your department. But assess those needs and then figure out uh, if you're lacking, how you're going to approach that shortfall or that hole or that gap. Um, Hopefully you're doing this on a continuing basis and you may have a plan for a progressive renewal of tools. Obviously you have those um, materials that you use a lot every day. Uh, Sorry, the word is escaping me. Um, Uh, but there needs to be a continuous resupply. There's other things like big purchase items like vehicles for your inspectors to get to project sites where um, you need to be prepared for that large expenditure, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And how do you plan for that? What is the goal there? You also look at what what happens in terms of workload through your building department. And as I've mentioned, every building department is a little different. Some departments, just a trickle of projects come through. You might even be able to do it with uh, one person, yourself, and a couple of contracted as needed uh, individuals. Other departments, as I've also mentioned, have so much work coming through them that they need multiple persons on full-time basis at all the positions because there's just that much work coming through. And it's not like because of how the rules are written, you have your 30-day clock to do your plans examinations, you have your 4-day clock to do your building inspection. Um, you have the 4 days to render an interpretation if one is requested. That stuff doesn't change, even though the workload might change. So what is the need based on the workload, and then yeah, you what are the skills of your employees, what is the experience of your employees or your staff, how can you distribute that workload to keep the workflow as efficient as possible, and you keep all your staff uh, suitably supplied with work or loaded with work, if you will, um, without necessarily overloading one person at the expense of, or underloading one person at the expense of another. Um, so you have to look at all that stuff and make sure that the workload is distributed well into the right people, and that you have enough of the right certified personnel to complete those jobs and those tasks. So also what comes along with running a department is setting those work rules. We don't set those in the building code. Sort of the whole how the department works and what those processes are within the department are established by the building official as the leader of the building department. Um, we have some timelines that need to be hit. We have some requirements that the building owner needs to meet for them to start construction or occupy a building, that relies on the building department having completed certain tasks and gotten to certain points. But how they do that within their department relies on the rules that are established for the department. And typically those would be established by the building official. How we're going to notice that is, and how we might make recommendation is, again, overall administration of the building department. And if we get complaints here at the Board of Building Standards that uh, Department XYZ has been continually uh, running over the 30 days for a plans examination, or the building department, I mean, I call for an inspection and I keep getting told, well, I can't get out in 4 days, but I'll be there on day 5 or day 8. Get there as quickly as I can. Um, uh, that kind of stuff usually results from not having good work rule policies, not enough staff for the workload that's coming through the department, and adjustments have not been made. So that's kind of how we'll get back through to this, if it's something that we get called about here at the board. And of course, it's always good to have a way to give feedback to your personnel. Um, Everybody that I've ever come in contact with, including myself, likes to know how their work has been perceived. Are they doing a good job? Could they do better? Um, uh, what do they do that's very effective? What do they do that, yeah, may be more time consuming than it needs to be? Um, uh, and and so having a system where you can have some regular evaluations, um, so that it's not always punitive, that it's not when they hear, the building officials say, "Hey Joe, can you come into my office, and by the way, close the door." um, and the only time that happens is right before Joe gets relieved from his duties and responsibilities at the department. So, you know, if the process can be well-rounded, and uh, sort of uh, the uh, positive comments come along with the constructive comments, you have a system where you can recognize employees for jobs well done. Um, you still have to do the discipline that comes with having certified persons that have duties and responsibilities. Because if they aren't meeting those duties and responsibilities, there needs to be a process in place to help them recognize that and move forward in the process. Uh, try to correct the deficiencies, try to pay more attention to how they do their jobs in line with their certification and in line with the building code. Um, and of course, there's always a need to keep record of a lot of this kind of stuff, um, because we are, um, well, we are an at-will state. We are also uh, a public employing entity, and if there is reason to discharge someone, it's always good to have a record of all the ways you've tried to make them aware of their shortcomings, help them improve their deficiencies, uh, and it just wasn't happening, it wasn't working, and you have record to support that. It's also good to have the positive recognition out there too. So um, these are all good things, because when that 35-year employee comes up for retirement, you have a nice record of uh, things to acknowledge him for and roast him for, hopefully. The other thing that you need to be thinking about when you're in the building official position, we've talked a lot about the needs of the department. We've talked about the workload in the department and sort of the flow of work that's coming by. Um, there's a lot of departments out there that hit uh, bumps. They hit a big business comes in with a whole bunch of new buildings, and it not only is their immediate building big, but it may also generate ancillary construction, and it's just a volume of work that hits all at once. And uh, it may be hard for the building department to bring on employees to meet the needs that they're going to have with this surge in the volume in the time frame that it's there. So one solution is to uh, contract some of those services from an, another building department that's next door, or there's some independent agencies out there that have certified personnel that you could contract with them for a limited time period for certain services. Um, and, that's one thing, and it's good to have contracts for those. Uh, the other thing is, you may be leasing vehicles, or you may be leasing your your digital equipment. All of those things come with contracts, and needing to negotiate those agreements. Uh, so that's out there. has nothing to do with building code compliance other than you have these requirements that you have to meet timeframes and you have to meet the needs of your community, and the timeframes don't change because the workload gets uh, much larger. Uh, Also, on the backside of that, if there was a lot of work and all of a sudden it falls off and you have a, a lot of equipment or personnel that's just sitting around, sometimes contracted services is easier to so adjust those costs out of your operating budget rather than having full-time or fully owned pieces of equipment or personnel. You need uh, those are all things that need to be assessed when you're thinking about running a building department. How am I going to meet the needs of the constituents of my jurisdiction uh, and meet those time frames as time goes on? Uh, to some degree, you really need to be flexible in that. Rigidity might be your enemy in some of those cases. So there's a lot of things that you really need to be thinking about as the building official, as the leader of your department, about how do you keep your department effective, efficient, running smoothly. Uh, how do you reward the department and its personnel with jobs well done? Um, how do you work to make them more efficient if they have areas of weakness? Um all that kind of stuff is part of what you do as a building official. Fiscal duties. Um, so let's say I've been talking for about an hour and a half. Is anybody interested in a brief little break? 5, 10 minutes? Or do you want me to keep on rolling? Yes, sure. How about we take about a 10-minute break? So how about 8 minutes? I have 3:52. How about 3 o'clock? I'll pick it up again with fiscal duties.
Hey Jay,
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to comment on this, but Tom had a question in the chat that I
Mhm.
responded to, but the question was if the adjudication order is not responded to and no extension is requested, does the building official have to send an order per 109 or does it just expire? And I responded that an adjudication order doesn't have an expiration date per se. The owner has the 30-day right to appeal, and then
Mhm.
once that passes, if they haven't done anything, the order still is there for them to comply with or
Yes.
to be released by the BO in accordance with 109.2.
Yes.
Would you have any other comments on that?
Um, the probably the only comment that I would say is um, while the owner has a 30-day window to appeal an adjudication order, um, if time goes on, they don't appeal, um, and so then that adjudication order basically becomes enforceable, that they are going to make the changes necessary as required by the adjudication order. That as time goes on, something changes, and the owner is like, look, I think I really want to appeal that. I think I have a better way to solve this than revise and resubmit my drawings. Um, I think that the building official should listen to that request, and they should make a determination whether or not um, uh, the how should I put this? I think they can issue another adjudication order
So
with a new date, so that now that 30-day window opens up again.
yeah, and
Um,
so just real quick, so we do
yeah.
that
Hmm.
oftentimes when somebody says they begin by adjudicating, they
Yeah.
begin that they want to appeal 7 items.
Yeah.
We work through it and there's only 1 item left that they need a variance for.
Yeah.
So we issue the adjudication and what I'll do is I'll put this in an email, send it to you guys, so I'm not taking up your break. But
Hmm.
the big question, the debate is, I thought that there's somewhere that says when you have plans that are non-compliant, you issue a correction letter or an adjudication order, and
Hmm.
and if they don't do anything for 180 days, it expires.
Okay.
But,
So
and then,
yeah.
so
Well,
with the same thing for
what
the,
happens is the application expires.
okay, so the application expires. So we have the same
Yes.
thing if something's not inspected, if the work is abandoned for 180 days. Right? Then
The
there's that,
potentially the approval expires.
okay, right. And then if work hasn't started for a year,
Hmm.
then the approval. So the big
The
debate
approval
is that
expires.
I've always stand that the way the code reads, that it becomes invalid or the
The,
application expires. The debate
yeah.
is whether or
Yes.
not I have to issue them an order saying that it expired because they did nothing. I mean, we have probably 1,000 projects a year that get submitted and die on the vine.
Hmm.
And the
Yeah.
question is, do I have to issue them an order that has the right to appeal and subject to all of those processes?
This
Or
is
does it
what
So
just
you,
expire and
yeah,
die on the vine?
yeah.
Jay, this
I
is
would.
what you,
Yeah.
I, and Deborah talked about
Yeah.
yesterday, I think it was.
Yeah. Um,
So
one, I don't.
what I'll do though, Jay, is
Yeah.
I'll kind of write it up and send
Okay.
it so that
Do
I'm not
that.
taking your break.
Okay.
Go ahead and take a break.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Yeah, we'll respond. But I think at the end of the day, what sort of a real simple answer is I don't think an adjudication order has to be issued. Um, but we'll explain some more in a response that we might send out.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay, I extended it by 5 minutes because Tom was asking a question that I thought people would want to stick around for. But it's now about 3:05, so if you wanted to start back, it's all you.
Okay. Yeah, I saw the notice there in the chat, so I was hanging out till 3:05, and we are just now at 3:05. So I'm going to pick it back up again so that maybe we can get through this a little before the 4:30 hour. So the next area we're going to talk about are the fiscal duties. As with any kind of department operation, there is a budget and there's expenses and there's dollars coming in and keeping tabs on all that and balancing that, paying the bills, making sure that you have enough funds available for to operate your department is important. And I be surprised if building officials are hired and don't have fiscal duties for the departments that they are leading and in charge of. So uh, know that you have to do those number crunching things as well when you're a building official. Of course, we would uh, we would certainly hope that this is one that you definitely can delegate. I think you need some knowledge of and control over, but someone else may very well be uh, more adept at crunching numbers. I know they would be for me if I were the building official. It's not one of my favorite things to do. I can do it. It's not what I like to do. So anyway, on the fiscal side, um, much the same as when we were talking about the department having to assess the department needs. What comes with that is the resources that they need. We've talked about the personnel and the equipment resources, but the other very important one is the money side or the fiscal side of it. And that's definitely a resource that helps you in acquiring good personnel, retaining good personnel, as well as um, providing the tools that they need to do their jobs effectively and efficiently. I know that here at the board, we have made several arguments uh, on a fiscal side, or a fiscal argument, that if we increase the size of the monitor and if we go to all digital submissions, that our process can become more efficient, and as a result, we can save the department. We can produce more in the same, or conduct more reviews in the same time, and thus be more efficient with our time, and in this sense save the department some money. Um, that has proven to be true, and we had some numbers to back that up. So what was really kind of neat is that we evaluated what we did here. We set a goal of being more efficient. We identified what we needed to meet that goal, and we made uh, the argument with the powers that be, and we were granted that opportunity, and it has proven to be true. So, you have to think about all that stuff. How can you be more efficient? How can you use those dollars more effectively? uh, it always starts with an understanding sort of what you have currently, and so you're going to have an idea of what your budget is, or the request for the budget, and whether you get that amount or not all depends on your jurisdiction and how good your uh, argument is for that budget. uh, but then you also have to be prepared that you may make a budget request, but you may not be granted that budget. You may be granted a lesser budget, uh, which is often the case. I would guess. I don't have much experience in building departments requesting budgets, but on all the experience I do have, that seems to be the case. Um, in so doing, I think you also need to have a plan. Okay, I didn't get the budget I wanted, but I have this budget. I have priorities in my expenditures, and so we're going to be able, with this budget, we're going to be able to fund A, B, and C, but D and E are going to have to fall off the list, at least for now. And so it's not only preparing that request, kind of defending why you need that budget, and then being prepared for not getting all of that budget, and then but you do have a budget to work, so what are we going to do with that? So it's kind of thinking the puzzle all the way through, not just, boy, it would be nice if, and then dealing with the consequences, but you know uh, it'd be nice if, but I know I might be less, and this is my plan. So once again, one of the things that was nice in our situation is that we have a methodology of collecting data here about how many projects we do, how quickly projects are moved off of the shelf, off of the review shelf, um, how many projects are initial, how many projects are resubmittals, and we're kind of tracking all those numbers on a weekly basis. And what that helps us do is keep tabs on our productivity. And so then a bunch of statistics are starting to be generated. We also have dollars that come in relative to our authorizations and our insignias that are sold. And so we can then compare our productivity against a dollar amount, and that can give us an efficiency. And we wouldn't know that stuff without having records and statistics to be able to pull that information together. That starts helping us understand where our deficiencies are. It helps us understand, um, in knowing those deficiencies, if we want to improve them, what kinds of things might we be able to acquire to make them better. Um, we too are faced with that timeline pressure, and how do we get it done? I think that where was I going? I lost my thought. Sorry. Um, but you do have to have those reports and those records. Um, One of the reasons that I say this is because um, in a day-to-day situation, it feels like we're moving along at about the same pace, um, and yet our uh, time for getting projects out has increased in the last 18 months. Um, and if we didn't keep the reports and we didn't keep those statistics, it might be hard for us to understand that uh, that time is increasing in our review. It's still under our 30-day time window, but it's gone from an average of about 4 days to an average of about 16 days, as an example. Um, uh, what the statistics are telling us is that the volume of work coming through our program has increased by that much. That it's just taking that much longer because there's that many more projects that have come in between the project I'm reviewing now and when I'll get to that project that came in today. So uh, all that helps to inform us about what our needs are. Same thing happens in your department. If you don't have some kind of statistics to look at, some numbers to back up what you're uh, having to deal with, or to uncover or shed light on why something might be happening. So think about that and think about the numbers that are important to you. Think about how you can capture data, raw data, that can monitor that and how you're performing. Um, Obviously, mounting this goes along with it. There's always money in, money out. You're bringing those fees in. You're paying your bills. You have costs going out. Um, and that all goes against the budget. And of course, this is then part of the record. This is a basis or a foundation for the budget you're going to ask for next year, or if you're on a biennium, the year after that. It all kind of helps in the development of information, so that you have some real solid factual information to support your requests, to monitor your performance, to your productivity, your efficiencies. And you can't do that without keeping these records. And then, of course, um, uh, while you as the building official may not be doing the actual um, bookkeeping part of it, I think you do need to monitor it on a regular basis. Where are we? What's happening? Are you noticing any trends? Um, Heaven forbid that it's like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. We seem to have projects going up. We're collecting, the same fee on more applications, but yet our bank account keeps going down. Uh, where's the money going? Um, there could be any number of reasons for that, and hopefully they're all lawful reasons and above board reasons. But sometimes uh, bad things happen, and if you're not monitoring, you may not notice it, you may not catch it. So, and then you as the building official, you as the leader, will have to answer some tough questions to the owners of the building department certification. That would be city council, county commissioners, township trustees, um, and that goes back to being prepared to testify. And my guess is nobody's really interested in doing that for that reason. So monitoring what's happening is important. So the kind of down and dirty fiscal duties, really just trying to give you some ideas about what you might be asked to do as a building official in a jurisdiction, um, and some suggestions about how this can be more than just number crunching, how it might be able to be used as a tool to help you prepare your next budget request, or think about how you can make yourself more efficient, and it becomes part of the tools to support the request, as well as the tools to evaluate, after you've implemented it, did it make the impact that you thought it would, and was it valuable, or did it turn out to be not that? And then why not that? And what do you do next? It's in some ways, it's always a moving target. I think the world keeps changing, so we need to keep moving with it, doing that tango, doing that two-step, and this is one of the tools that you have in your toolbox to see how well you're doing. Public relations and duties. This is one that when I first saw it in a building official presentation, I thought, uh, I recognize it now as I'm seeing it and thinking about it and knowing my own experience that public relation duties, I was like, I went to school to be an architect. I went to school to design buildings. I went to school to work in an architectural's office, be in the construction industry, uh, realize or help owners realize the delight of a ribbon cutting and walking in the door, and that's about as close to public relations as I got. Um, uh, but yet, when you move into the ownership of a business and you recognize that there's a lot more, and by ownership, I really do mean leadership. It there is a whole lot more responsibility on your part in this public relations area. What is in my case, what is the face of the firm? Who is the face of the firm? Uh, in the building official, what is the reputation of our department? How do people think about us in our department? Think of the building department. When I walk into the city council meeting or the county commissioner meeting, and I'm going to give a report or make a request, what is the perception of me as the building official and the department that I lead? Um, uh, what do I hear when I'm sitting down at the local cantina or the local restaurant, or probably not the library, because people are supposed to be quiet in the library, but go to those public events, the high school football game, uh, or a concert or a show, a parade. What do I hear when people talk about the building department, when they talk about how we're doing, and the things that are going on? Uh, Heaven forbid we have uh, a disaster in our community, either be it a natural disaster like a tornado, or something where a building has failed and people have been injured, and uh, sort of then what happens? How do we respond, and how does the public know that we're responding? How does the public know that we're doing what we need to do, and that we're participating in the solution, not being part of the problem? All kinds of things like that. And this is all working in the public relation uh, aspect of it. And um, much like if we get a complaint coming to the Board of Building Standards, the first place we're going to reach out to is the building official. We're going to want to find out from the building official what's happening in this situation. We understand that every story has two sides. We understand that we may have only received one point of view on the topic, and we want to come to the building official. Well, we want to find out what's happening uh, from the building department's perspective, and we'll ask the building official. Uh, you're you're the face of the building department. You are the leader of that group, and what goes on there you should know about. So uh, uh, that's kind of where all this stuff goes. So probably the first and most straightforward, at times the simplest, maybe not always, but one of the things is providing code information. Um, you know, Not everybody out there has familiarity with the construction industry or how it works. Not everybody out there, building owners in particular, have an understanding of when they need to get an approval, why an approval is important, what are some of the benefits that an approval gives them. All of these things could be code information that you, the building department, can think about and maybe provide some real basic signage in your office or promotional information that sits on the counter. Um, Springtime is here. Uh, Spring weddings, summer weddings, people might be wanting to set up temporary tents to house the assembly. Do they need an approval? Uh, you might have a real simple guidance document that helps people understand when they need an approval and when they don't, relative to setting up a temporary tent in the backyard for wedding reception, for example. Um, Excuse me. Huh. Uh, Trying to think. Uh, there's a lot of examples out there, um, but those are a few that popped into my head. The other thing is uh, being a representative of the building department, and participating in various code or professional organizations. So, do you belong to OBOA? Do you participate in OBOA activities? If you are also a registered design professional, do you belong with your local, like, AIA chapter or engineering chapter? Um, and how do you participate in those? Uh, we have some building officials here in Ohio that participate in ICC. They have seats on the council. Um, uh, we have individuals here in Ohio that have submitted code change proposals, and they go down, they present their code change, they defend their code change at the code hearings, which, by the way, are coming up. We have Group A starting April 7th down in Orlando, Florida. So there is a lot of opportunity for participation in these things, and one of the things that does is it gets you out there, it gets you known, it shows that you have an interest in what you do and the process of the industry. It may also help you uh, explain, or give you the opportunity to explain uh, the benefits of what your department brings, what code compliance brings, what this approval process brings, in or at a time that is not full of time pressures. It's not talking to a design professional or an owner who it needs to get this approval so they can get a bank loan so they can start the construction, and they just don't have the patience or don't have the time to understand or get an explanation of why all this is important. But when you're away from all those pressures, you may have an opportunity to talk about the process in a way that doesn't feel so uh, uh, restricting or um, barrier like, even though we don't believe that it really is. And we would like other people to understand it that way. And we would like those organizations that administer the code to not use it that way. Not only for code or professional groups, but you probably have community groups out there, be it one of the lodges or Kiwanis or a church group or Boy Scouts of America or um, uh, youth hockey group or little leagues. There's opportunities around, and while some of those may seem kind of odd for a building department or a building official to be part of, I'm sure all of those groups at some point or another make use of buildings that went through a building approval process. There are education opportunities out there to talk with young people in particular about uh, how it how it works. Maybe you can develop interest in the industry. Um, Maybe you make connections and open eyes as time goes on. So it's an opportunity, once again, to talk about what you do, what the benefits are with what you do. I remember working with a school district, and I spent a lot of time. Uh, it wasn't the Kiwanis group, but it was something similar to that. Uh, and it was made up of basically leadership in the community, and having opportunities to talk with them about some of the importance of what we brought to the table and what we did, without having those pressures of needing to make decisions. It was friendly conversations, and kind of informal in a lot of ways. And I think these opportunities do this. Um, Having yourself, if you're uh, close to a county fair, or there's some kind of uh, fair or market in your jurisdiction, that you might want to have some information set up, maybe a little booth, to talk about things. It it's going to be different for every community. It's going to be different for every department. Some things may make more sense for one department, may not make as much sense for another department. Um, uh, we're just putting it out there that this is part of community relations. These are opportunities for you to uh, talk about the importance of the building department, talk about the value that they bring to the community, uh, without having those pressures of somebody wants an answer for why something is problematic in whatever way that it might be problematic. Um, so people may have more time, they may have more patience to listen, and that, I think, that buys goodwill, um, for an issue tomorrow. Uh, Touched base on this just briefly, in one of the opening parts. Providing informational handouts. We've had an example, and I think there's a copy of it in the handouts for this session that you can find on the web page. Um, but it's like, why do we need building inspections? And the Board of Building Standards put this together, and it's a real simple little trifold that prints on one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and you fold it up, and it has um, a good, clear explanation of why building inspections are important, what the value is, and this is tied to the Residential Code of Ohio, and it got produced shortly after the Residential Code of Ohio was established, which was back in 2006, and so it was a few years after that. Um, but it's really helped uh, make people understand what the benefits are of having a residential building department in their jurisdiction. And uh, I don't have any statistics, unfortunately, as to how uh, if it had any impact, but I know there's at times been a lot of jurisdictions that have had these and had them setting out on their counter. I am kind of wondering if you have a commercial department, but you don't have a residential department in your jurisdiction, if it has any benefit to set it out there, if you, as information to the community, that maybe we want to have a residential building department in our jurisdiction. Um, the other thing is, again, uh, a lot of times people have small projects that it might be more efficient, more effective, a better use of time if you prepare a little um, cheat sheet or Cliff Notes version of, how, what do I need to do to put a shed in my backyard? What do I need to, with the building department? What do I need to do um, if I want to add add on to my house? What do I need to do if that one might be a little more complicated. You know, do I need a permit if I put a fence around my yard? Um, those things uh, can be dealt with informational handouts or and anymore. We're showing a little bit of age, I think, in our presentation here. I think a lot of this stuff probably fits better. Um, if you think about a handout as a printed document, um, you might also think about these things as um, digital opportunities that they go to the website, and on the website you have, your frequently asked questions, or um, you know ha, what are my permit requirements for mm, this project or that project, so they can think about some of those things that help your constituents know and understand what their responsibilities are relative to getting approvals. Prepare and present budget requests. I think I talked quite a bit about this in the fiscal side of things, but it's still uh, sometimes you may have to uh, make this presentation in a public setting. Um, you may have to, particularly if you're looking to do something bigger, like sort of really upscale your budget request because your department is upscaling because the need in your community is growing and growing exponentially. Um, and sometimes having support of the public is a good idea. And how are you going to uh, push all this information out uh, to the public, and so that there might be a feeling of support or the message of support from the constituents to the city council or the county commissioners. There's because face it, most of the time we're dealing with taxpayer dollars, right? And they want a lot of the taxpayers that live around me don't want to spend one more dime than they absolutely have to. So uh, it all works into the mix. So sort of have those presentations prepared, like you're asking your neighbor. Media news and media contact, or managing news media contacts. This one is uh, probably the biggest one I wasn't even thinking about when I joined the group here at the Board of Building Standards. But it's like, yeah, um, you know, you could find yourself in a situation where either, and particularly today, with everybody is a walking camera, and they have access to sending video feeds and memes out, across the world. Um, Somebody captures building department personnel out back behind a building, uh, maybe innocently taking a break, but as it's presented, being a lazy government employee. And this goes viral. And how do you handle it? What do you do? What do you say? Um, what uh, what goes on? And probably uh, this this whole topic is not really my forte, but fortunately, one of the things we do have is we do have a resource document, and it's the do's and don'ts of media interviews, and it's in the attachments of course handouts. And I see that Meg posted a link to the course handouts for us, but um, they in the do's and don'ts of successful media interviews, they give you some real basic do's and some real basic don'ts, and they fill in some information. Um, and it's an article done by Rick Kelly, uh, and some of the don'ts are, don't be a slave to the question. Uh, Find a way to make the points that you want to make, that portray your organization, and your point of view in a positive light. Uh, so that requires you to, listen to the question. Uh, the question might be, why is your organization struggling to achieve its goals? And your first impulse might be, uh, uh, to, just really resist, uh, and but sometimes you can take that question and just use it to reframe it a little bit, um, and turn it into, that your organization, your department has made terrific strides in recent months, for example, and then start listing those things. So, when we talk about, uh, assessing your, uh, department, we talk about, building, uh, an idea of what the needs are. How do we make it more efficient? How do we do our jobs better? Um, are we managing our conduct, uh, well? Are we operating in an ethical way? All those things build into being able to answer this question, instead of assuming that the question is right, that the organization is struggling, to say, what you've done in a positive way, to improve how the organization is operating. Um, you know, Another don't is, don't let yourself get drawn into speculation. It's always a challenge to, uh, stay out of the what if scenarios. Um, much like in the first question, every organization is going to have some struggle somewhere. I can't imagine of an organization that doesn't have something that they, uh, or doesn't have anything that they can't improve on. The second question, it's always, I think you can always come up with a scenario that, what if, paint a picture that would cause, a problem, and, you know, it becomes a slippery slope. I think you want to, really work out of the information that you know. How do you know your department? What is your department good at? Um, how are you protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants of that building? Um, how are you administering the building code in such a way that that building, uh, uh, its safety and its sanitation, is in compliance with the building code? Make sure you have a positive way of stating your message. Uh, know what that message is. Um, Lead with that message and kind of refer back to it. Make it, you know, it's the common adage in advertising. Um, it used to be you had to say it 3 times, for it to stick with people. Now I think studies have shown it's up to like somewhere between 5 and 8 times that you have to say it, and I think some of that is, dealing with our, attention span, but, you still have in our how much information we're bombarded with on a constant basis. But, you know, what is your message, and push it out there, uh, as often as you can. Um, we uh, oh, I'm sorry, I went too soon. Um, some other points in here. Be gracious, uh, be polite, be respectful, listen, answer the question. Uh, I think you want to really try to, um, put a favorable light on what you do in a way that people will hear and understand that the department's concern is the safety of the occupants, the safety and the health of the occupants in the building. Um, Obviously, there's limitations to what you can do relative to any situation, uh, and uh, I, but I, but I think you can deliver that message in a polite and respectful way. And I think if you know your subject matter and you stay within what you know and you stay within where your authority is, I think the answers will come off as genuine and direct and uh, not being too glib or deceitful or um, non-transparent, if you will. You're not hiding something. You're being straightforward. You're being straight up. Um, uh, yeah. So anyway, I think there's some good information in that do's and don'ts of media interviews, and it will go a long ways to helping you be prepared. I think grab a couple of them, uh, get those mastered, then grab a couple more and get those mastered. Eventually, you'll be a professional interviewer, and you'll know how to handle any situation that comes your way. Participate in the code change processes. I mean, we all have looked at the building code. We've all had our questions about this section or that section, this requirement, that provision. Um, how does the existing building code work with the requirements for new construction? How do the reference standards tie into the building code? Um, have you noticed areas of conflict that you think could be cleaned up? Can some language be made more clear? Um, as the interpreter of the building code, you, the building official, probably have the opportunity or at least have recognized uh, where problems are more so than other certified persons working in building departments. Obviously, uh, we all can, building inspectors, plans examiners, uh, even board staff over here, and we don't carry certifications. But uh, because you are the principal interpreter of the code, what would clarify it for for yourself as you're doing it, and uh, because the building code is a consensus based or a consensus developed set of rules, a set of requirements, it is open to everybody to participate in the process of making it better, making it clearer, making it more accurate, um, without making it uh, a, a bigger barrier, without making it uh, um, overly restrictive. All there's uh, I think there's always a way to uh, make it better because and sometimes it needs to be made better because new technologies are developed, new materials come along, new systems come along, new knowledge about how wind and water and moisture affect a building, penetrate a building, work their way through a building, and then how do we design buildings to defend against that so that those health risks aren't increased with moisture penetration that in a dark space with a food source allows the growth of mold, uh, that wind loads May or may not be increasing and causing more problems on buildings. One of the changes in the 24 Ohio Building Code based on the 21 IBC was, dealing with parapets and ballasted membrane roofs and the effect of wind on that ballast and being able to blow the ballast off the roof onto neighboring occupants or nearby occupants and neighboring buildings. So there's always kind of these studies going on and this stuff happening while you as a building official probably don't get into the kind of study that resulted in those code change proposals. I do think that you have some real practical experience and real practical exposure to conditions that occur in buildings where the building code uh, is not clear enough. So everybody is able to participate. I think building officials have a really good perspective because you have to interpret the provisions, interpret the requirements to be able to suggest some good changes to building codes. Um, we have our process here in Ohio to change the Ohio Building Code. There's also the International Code Council, which is on a 3-year cycle, and it addresses the model codes that we use. And of course, if a code change proposal is sent to us, one of the suggestions, and I believe it's even on the application form, is that you, as a code change petitioner for Ohio, you also consider making an application to change the model code. So we would encourage you to participate as high up in the process as possible. So public relation duties. So yeah, providing code information, participating in various code and professional organizations. It's really get out there, put a face to the department. You're not that evil backroom place that wants to prevent me from building my dream home. Uh, you're an integral agency within your community that wants to help keep your community safe when they're in buildings, safe and healthy when they're in buildings. And that's really kind of the purpose. And you need to get that. Well, we suggest that getting that message out is part of the building officials' responsibilities. And uh, I think that we want to just make you aware of that. So uh, we're gonna kind of swing back around, back again to the responsibilities of the building official, and we have that responsibility to enforce those rules of the board, and as a consequence, it's also enforcing chapters 3781 and 3791 of the revised code, where we get the authority to write those rules. And it's dealing with the construction, arrangement, and erection of buildings and parts thereof. Um, and it's about conducting yourself in a professional, courteous, impartial, responsive, and cooperative manner, as well as your staff. And the building official has that authority and responsibility to render interpretations. You're the first in line to give those interpretations, and the building owner may be in compliance with the interpretation, or they may not be in compliance. And of course, then you have to have those policies and procedures to clarify all that. So issuing of approvals, issuing of correction letters, issuing of adjudication orders. Um, and and doing all this in a way that liberally construes the intent and purpose of the code, um, such that building owners can realize the construction of a safe and sanitary, energy efficient, and accessible where necessary building. Um, having a system in place to track and audit the projects, uh, and then have and to make sure that the building department personnel performs their duties, and that is the catch-all, having sort of overall administration of the building department. Just uh, kind of rounds out what you need to have. Um, and uh, with that, I got through the second half a little faster than I thought I was, but I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. Does anybody have any questions about what I have been talking about here? Usually, when I'm in a room of building officials, I get questions thrown at me. I know we had one talking about adjudication orders and response a response to adjudication order, or rather lack of response to an adjudication order, kind of what happens. Um, and what I was going to say about that or expand on that was, um, this is dealing with um, expiration of applications, expiration of approvals, uh, and whether an adjudication and when they does an adjudication order have to be issued for them to officially be considered expired or invalid. And I think how I would answer that is, I believe the language in the Chapter 1 of the Ohio Building Code is sort of self-explanatory, that if certain things happen or don't happen, actually, um, uh, that either the application or the approval becomes invalid after a period of time. Uh, and whether the jurisdiction uh, believes they need to issue an adjudication order, there's nothing in the requirement that says you have to, and there's nothing that prohibits you from doing it. So I think that would be a conversation to have with your law director about how they read the uh, provision, and how you want to address it. I do think, and it's a recommendation from the board, that part of the tracking and auditing process should probably include uh, when an application or approval is approaching that time frame where it might become invalid, and the owner has an opportunity to make an extension. If they do so before the deadline, that the building department might send out a notification reminding the owner of this provision, and that if they do nothing on this date, this provision says that that application or that approval will be invalid. And what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is they have to go back and redo that portion of the approval process, be it make an application and start a plan review process, or um, well, it all kind of goes back to that, or uh, and so uh, I think there is some judgment that could be made there. Um, and the challenge, as I've always seen it with that one, is that the uh, uh, the the conditions in which it becomes invalid are usually that the owner hasn't responded, or the owner hasn't started construction, or the owner has suspended construction. Uh, response by the owner is probably pretty easy to document. Start of construction is probably pretty easy to document. Suspension of construction is probably a little more difficult to document. So I think if you're looking at that stuff, those are some considerations that you make. Um,
J- Jay,
yeah,
could I hop on to that point and say that
yeah,
for the next 6 months, especially, that kind of proactive noticing people that their prior approval is about to expire is going to be especially important since we have the code change, which means that their prior plans will not
yes,
be code compliant to the code that's now in effect in Ohio.
yes. Yes. So Megan makes a good point. With our code change, if an owner does let those things expire because they've failed to do something, uh, they're starting over. They're starting over on non-residential buildings anyway. They're starting over with the new code. Let's see, 6 months
Yes,
since
Tom. Go ahead.
are not. Yes. Yeah. So. Um, Tom's making a good point, and that is that 6 months since the last inspection is not the same thing as being abandoned for 6 months, and that is what makes it difficult to document whether the project has been suspended or construction has been suspended or abandoned for 6 months, which is the action that the owner has to take to make an approval invalid. Um, After construction has started. So, and what is work? What is construction? What does it mean abandoned or suspended? If I put 3 nails in the wall, have I done enough work to keep it active? Um, and that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think the point is made that it could be a small amount of work, it could be on a consistent basis, it could be on an inconsistent basis, but 6 months is a long time for a project to sit vacant, and that's another reason why we think that a courtesy uh, notice to the building owner, um, based on your auditing and tracking, that says, hey, we haven't heard from you in 5.5 months. What's happening with your project? Have you been progressing? Have you been doing construction? Um, we want to remind you that per this section of the building code, if your project stays suspended or uh, for 6 months, you may run the risk of losing your approval. If uh, you can ask for an extent and remind them they can ask for an extension and get another 6 months if they have in fact been suspended. If they haven't been suspended, it gives them an opportunity to say, no, we've been working, we've done this, this, and this. We're just not ready for our next required inspection. That gives you, the department, knowledge that yes, they have continued that. Now you have a record that they have been continuing. 6 month clock can start again, or you know, and then your tickler goes out if you haven't heard from them down the road. So again, tracking and auditing your projects starts becoming important when you're looking at all these kinds of issues. Um, because the other thing is um, it's not a ugh, it's not very functionally effective if you have a bunch of approvals out there that are just hanging open, and you have this provision in the code that says uh, they they should become invalid if nothing's happening. Um, and if for no other reason, uh, there's a lot of complaints that come into our department that say, hey, I'm mad at my next door neighbor. They just never seem to finish their project. They're always under construction. They've been working on their house for 3 years now, and I'm getting sick and tired of it. I want them to wrap it up. Um, Now, they've been working on their project and they've been progressing it, and they have a legal right to do that under the approval. Um, but let's say the conversation goes a little differently, that they started this house and they've not done any work on it for 6 months, and water is piled up into places and the mosquitoes are breeding and it smells bad, and I've noticed rats running around, and what's happening over here. And that's a different scenario. And that section in the code may be more applicable, that building owner needs to, uh, has perhaps abandoned it, and his approval, or his application, in that case approval, would be invalid, and he then doesn't have the license to continue building that house. He needs to come back to the building department.
Can
uh,
I add to that?
you certainly may.
I would say that that's why we stress the communication is so important, because at the end of the day, a judgment call is being made as to work being done or not being done that relates to that invalidity, and people may want to contest that, because
Mhm.
in an existing building, it's an interior fit out. Maybe they did something and nobody was around to see it. Does that
Mhm.
mean it didn't happen?
Right.
You know? So there's just the documentation and communication is critical to keeping it from getting messy.
Yep.
But at that point, if you're keeping record of the inspections that you're doing, if they've been doing work, but they haven't called for an inspection on the work that's been done, is the work really done in accordance with the plans? You don't know.
Yeah. So,
Jay, I
uh,
wanted to add something
yeah.
onto the budgeting and
Mhm.
staffing portion of your discussion. One of the changes that we made in the building department certification rule was to make it a little more clear that a building department needs to maintain sufficient staff to meet the needs of the community. And
Mhm.
so you can now point to our rule to say, I'm required to maintain sufficient staff to meet the needs of the community. And I'm looking forward and I see the Intel project barreling down on me like a bullet train. I need 20 more inspectors and 3 more plans examiners within the next 3 months.
Yeah. So that would be full disclosure. I am less involved in the certification rules. Megan is fully immersed in the certification rules, so she's bringing information to the table that's, uh, shall I say, new to me, as it might be to you. So, uh, go out there and take a look at the proposed rules. I think it's, going to be an encouraging thing for most. We're not going to get you whooped, Tom. Uh, um, so Chris is saying, let's see, sending an AO to a property owner and getting no response in a commercial setting. If you also send an AO to the tenant, or would you start with the tenant previous
I
to the
don't know that the
property owner?
tenant has a right to that
So,
AO unless they contractually have the right to build out the space
y-
within their
yeah,
contract, and then
yeah.
they stand in place of the owner in that
So,
case, right?
so how I think that should work, if everybody's doing what they should be doing, um, is the owner or the owner's representative is responsible to make application. The owner may be doing it, and they have tenants in the building, but the communication should go to, both, um, whoever's making the application and the owner should both get the notice. At the end of the day, the owner is responsible to fulfill the AO, um, and they would end up working through whatever agreement they have, written contract, informal agreement they have with the tenant, if the tenant, uh, actually made the application and is having the work approved to be done. So it's I think at the end of the day, both of those well, if the owner's doing the work and the tenant is just along for the ride, the tenant really doesn't get any notification. It's just the owner. But if the tenant has the
Authority.
authority to do the work on behalf of the owner, they would get it as the owner's representative, but the owner would also get it.
Yeah.
And I think they go at the same time myself. Ah.
Oh, well, that's a different story
Mhm.
entirely.
Yeah. Let's see.
That's probably going to the level of consult your jurisdiction's legal counsel. That's
Yeah.
not something that we can
Yeah.
necessarily weigh in on here.
I
No.
would be very careful with that because there's a lot of legal language and contracts between tenants and landlords,
Right, but the tenant
and you
probably
don't want to get yourself in the middle of that.
and even if the tenant was allowed to improve the space or alter the space in some way, if the tenant's working without permits, the tenant was probably also held by their contract to do the work in a legal manner, which means complying with the building code and the procedures within the Ohio Building Code. But again, that's a question you're going to need to bring to your jurisdiction's legal counsel. That's not something that we could probably give you advice on here.
Mm-mm. Yep.
So
Let's see.
I would say go and be free and enjoy your weekend, everybody. This is the final minute of Code Academy. I should probably turn off this recording.
Let's see. Interesting comments about staffing. I've used